This is the Collecting Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Purse, here with your co host, Bill Hamill.
I'm somewhat more comfortable collecting real estate than I am collecting other stuff.
Welcome to Collecting Real Estate. My name is Stephen Purse. I'm here today with Bill Hamill.
Thanks, Stephen. Good morning.
Morning, Bill. So today's a little different. We're talking about a deal that you went under contract on, but you didn't end up purchasing. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, this was two different properties in towns that I'm very, very interested in. One being Half Moon, the other one being Wilton. They both have their really strong positives based on their locations and the desirability of these types of apartments. And no, unfortunately, it didn't work out.
So how long was this process for you from start to finish?
I would say I've been working on this for probably 3 months. So the first month was just more of getting the lead, seeing what the seller may take for the properties, some preliminary numbers. And then that was it for about a month. You know, the seller was waffling whether he even wanted to market his property or properties. And then a month went by and then things did pick up a little bit of steam.
And so this was 94 units. It would have been the biggest deal that you have executed. You said the first month was more of just learning about the property, talking to the seller, and then you were able to get under contract. Can you talk us through that process a little bit?
Yeah, after that first month, it was more of me just getting a good idea of the real brief details of the property. Then I was able to do a drive-by and see that I did have interest to move forward on something like that. So 3 or 4 weeks go by, seller does get over that hump of, choosing to sell. So at that point, it takes us, a few days, maybe a week to set up, at least a quick peek of some apartments, meet the seller and get a little bit further. And at that point, based on the numbers that were presented to me, locations, walkthrough of a few apartments, and just getting a general feel for both properties, same seller on both properties. It was a 50 unit and a 44, totaling 94. I knew I had strong interest. And then you just prepare that letter of intent and see if you can get that accepted just to get the ball rolling.
And I remember after that letter of intent, it did take a while for a finalized contract. There was a lot of back and forth between the attorneys. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, letter of intent didn't take long, actually. We came right around what, the brokers were thinking as far as a reasonable price for the buyer and seller. I saw a lot of upside potential on these deals, meaning just organic rent growth. So I saw it being very substantial. So I knew that I could get these properties, to a much higher value in probably a year to 2 years. So it fit my criteria perfectly. And after a letter of intent was accepted, we probably went 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, possibly even a little bit more than 4 weeks as far as just getting that contract done. So in a deal this size, the real estate brokers, typically don't prepare the contract. So it was given to seller's attorney to prepare it. And boy, did that turn into a back and forth.
Was that a red flag for you looking back, the fact that it took so long to come to terms?
Yeah, and looking back at all of this stuff, I can say, wow, red flag, red flag, red flag, whether it is or it isn't. Basically, it was a very difficult negotiation on what I thought were, terms that should be worked out much easier. meaning we had a meeting of the minds on the price, and now we're just waffling over how long they want to give for due diligence, mortgage commitment, and the actual closing. So it was a situation that they wanted me to agree to dates on the contract that just weren't realistic.
In your experience with deals this size and attorneys in this industry, how often do you see that? Do you see unreasonable expectations and asking to close in dates that just don't make sense?
Very rarely in my career and my experiences anyway. And, being a broker, I've represented a lot of clients on the buyer and sellers end. And very, very rarely are we arguing, or not necessarily arguing, just going back and forth on these types of dates. We all know in different time periods where, industry may be taking a little bit longer than it should for certain things. For example, during COVID, the market kind of went dead for a couple months where you didn't know what anybody was going to be doing as far as banks and time constraints. But once we got over that, the market got so busy that real estate closings were taking way longer than they should. So when we got under contract, we're on the tail end of COVID, and we're thinking magic numbers in this market: 45 days due diligence, at least 30. I can do it in 30 is fine with me, but 45 days industry standard, 75-day for mortgage contingency, 60 if you want to be really aggressive, and then 90 to 110 days to close. So they wanted us to be much more aggressive than that. And based on how the back and forth was going, it got to a point where I didn't want to concede at all, because if you feel like that you're conceding, you agree to some dates that are aggressive. If we don't hit those dates, now the fear was if the seller side was going to play a game of gotcha and, use you not hitting your dates against you. And I did not want to put my, deposit at risk for something that I felt, wasn't necessary.
Yeah, that was the first thing in the process that to me stood out as being not right. Up until then, we were so excited because this is what we spent time looking for. The goal was to find properties like this. It fit every criteria and it looked like a great deal. And then you start having this back and forth between the attorneys and just a little questioning on why that's happening. But we get through that, we get under contract, and then you start the due diligence process. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we got into due diligence, but through that process we were just talking about, it in all reality, where I have felt myself being a very reasonable buyer, and tried to. It's a real estate deal. It shouldn't be litigated. We have a meeting of the minds. Now let's work together. You have a real buyer that closes deals, and a seller that's interested in selling his property. And it should be as simple as that: work out reasonable dates and terms. And that process just made myself and my attorney even more guarded, to the point where, okay, we really have to protect ourselves. And it seemed like it was us against them, which is unfortunate. But we got past that. They agreed to our dates, and everything seemed very reasonable, seemed industry standard, got the contract done. We had 45 days due diligence, which in those first 2 weeks, I do a freedom of information law request from each town, which basically asks them for, all the things that pertain to the property, to the building, the history, if there's any violations, making sure that it has zoning compliances, all of that stuff that can be verified by the municipality, making sure that they're good with this property and they haven't had any issues with police visits and et cetera, et cetera. So we like to get through that process along with collecting leases, power bills, water bills, insurance bills, Schedule E's of the seller's tax returns, just to verify the income and expenses are what the seller said they are.
Mhm. Our offices are next to each other, and I kept popping over saying, what are you doing today? What's the step of the due diligence? Because I'd never seen that process, and there were so many new things to learn. I like how you said that it's a real estate transaction. It should be simple, because sometimes from the outside looking in, these deals look very complicated. There's a lot of money and it's a lot going on. But at the end of the day, there are standard terms and it should be simple. It's kind of like underwriting, where you can get out the big analysis spreadsheet with all the different tabs and look at investor returns. But if the numbers don't work out on a napkin, they're not going to work on that. And it really can be simple if you make it simple.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good example with the underwriting. And yes, you can do it on a napkin to see if you have that initial interest. So if the napkin test works out, year one has a reasonable rate of return to it, and I can say, all right, it's a reasonable rate of return, fair deal for the buyer and the seller, but I'm seeing that strong upside one way or another most of the time, getting that gross income much higher. I'm a player at that point. That means that there is upside, there's meat on the bone for driving that NOI. And simple as that. And then yes, then we will get into a much more thorough underwriting to really project where we'll be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years.
Absolutely. That thorough underwriting is necessary, but the simple one is really where it's all you need to start, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you get to that point in the due diligence. We're going day to day here. Can you keep talking about what happens after that?
Yeah, absolutely. Due diligence kind of goes in 3 phases here. So you have that, checking with municipality, collecting all the data from the seller. And then once you get all of that straight, you can schedule your inspection. So you want to get through the stuff that doesn't cost any money before you spend money on an inspection. So the due diligence was, it was fairly thorough. There was some holes in it, but things that we could live with, to move forward on the deal, things that didn't drastically change the deal, meaning, okay, I don't have this part of the due diligence and there's a few thousand off here, a few thousand off there. But if you plug that into the underwriting, it didn't necessarily affect, the IRR, the internal rate of returns, and the cash on cash heavily. So, that's the whole end result we're looking for. If we have a deal and the returns are in that range that we're looking for in relation to that deal, I don't pick small battles on due diligence to screw up a deal that's still a good deal, even though there's some missing due diligence items. Getting to the home inspection in any deal, I don't care if it's a single family or 100 unit, that's when the buyer and seller always crosses their fingers that I hope this inspection goes well, because that is usually the largest hurdle in any deal, because you never know what an inspector is going to find in properties that are built in one in 1960 and one in 1980, 1990. So here we are, inspection day last Monday and Tuesday, and that's when things went south.
What happened?
Well, we had a 50 unit on Monday, and just some serious structural defects. So my main purpose that day, or one of the main purposes that day, was to walk through each unit. And I had my rent roll, I have my columns that are important to me, as I'm going through each unit, grading the tenant, housekeeping, tenant attitude, the market rent, and how long the tenant's been there, and what a renewal rate would end up being depending on the grade of that tenant. And another column where, sometimes somebody wouldn't even be renewed after we take ownership for various reasons. And that went super well. I saw what I thought I was going to see: beautiful apartments that would just need to be turned over, and we would organically get some serious rent growth on renewals and new occupancies. And it went extremely well in that fashion. But once you get into, I guess you can say, the belly of the property, which is extremely important, meaning, crawl spaces, underneath garage areas, there were some severe defects. And you could see them with your own eyes as you got underneath there, whether it be cinder block walls in very serious disrepair, or very wet crawl spaces holding water, attics with mold, attics with vent pipes, bath fans venting into the attics, which can cause the mold or inevitably will cause mold, and et cetera, without getting into the long list of items that we saw from property to property. It just got to a point where we couldn't even try to retrade, meaning work out something, meaning get credits, monetary credits off of the contract to make it so it is fair for both parties. A lot of this stuff were just items that I would just have to live with going forward. And at this point in my journey, that type of work over the next 2 years wasn't in my business model.
Yeah, over the next 2 years, it didn't make sense. And it's never been in your business model to purchase buildings that aren't structurally sound. In your experience, what percentage of the time does this happen in inspection, where you get to this stage and then you see something that completely shuts the process down?
Well, I had been investing in the inner cities for so long, and with the inner cities comes older buildings. So you're looking at 80, 120, 130-year-old buildings. And when you are, getting into buildings like that, the home inspections commonly do have issues. Definitely safety items and smaller items, but very common. You're going to have major items that will affect the deal unless the buyer and seller can come to some type of an agreement to rectify the majors.
And I think it's important that you didn't even consider retrading. You saw that it wasn't sound and it wasn't something that fit your criteria, and you walked away.
Yeah, as you mentioned, which I explained to you along this process, that even when I was buying smaller properties, I might love the address, I might love the price, I might love the floor plans, which are major areas of criteria of mine. But if I saw a serious foundation issue or something like that, that would disqualify me as a buyer and I would move on. So once I was thinking about this deal similarly to those deals, I had to tell myself, why would this be any different? It's never these types of repairs, heavy construction, structural repairs were never in my business plan. They were never a wheelhouse part of construction for me. So if I didn't do it in the past, why would I start now?
And I think it's important for potential investors to see the ability to walk away from something, even though the numbers might look good on a spreadsheet and show good returns. The fact that you saw it, you saw what was wrong with it, and you're able to walk away.
Yeah, what it does say is, and it's easy for me to say because I've been a player in this market for a long time, and we keep on saying patience is so key when you're looking for a deal. And that really rings true and weeds out a lot of people who are interested in investing in real estate. And, you can have serious patience. It could take 6 months, a year and a half to find that deal. And then something goes wrong with the deal and you have to walk away and have that discipline to walk away and then be back to square one to say, okay, I've got to start with this patience thing all over again, waiting for that next deal. So it is very clear that if you are really interested in this business, sometimes it could take a serious amount of time to actually get into that deal, which really tests your commitment to be involved in this industry.
Yeah, I think that patience separates the professionals and shows you who ends up lasting in the industry. Is there anything that you learned from this process?
Yeah, I would have done more upfront stuff. On the small properties, I'm able to see more. In the past, I was able to see more where in my world, the first 15, 20 years in this business, and I'm looking at a property for the first time that hit the market, I'm almost, I'm adamant about seeing everything. I want to see all the apartments. I want to see the common areas, because if I'm able to get a good look at the property, I want to jump on that thing day one, before anybody else gets to it. And then over the last couple of years, especially with COVID, sellers have had, this convenience of, selling a multifamily building of any size and getting away with giving you a sneak peek of just a couple of apartments. So, here I am kind of evolving to industry standard. If I want to get a deal, I'm left conforming with this unreasonable situation that occurs commonly now, where I'm buying a 94 unit building. I saw 5 apartments, very little common areas. The seller wanted to be as discreet as possible, so he didn't, freak out his tenants about a sale. And all that did was get us 2.5 months down the road, thinking that, I had a deal, the seller had a deal, and then it all falls apart. If we were able to really get into some substantive items in the beginning up front, we could have saved each other a lot of time, and I would have known a lot of this stuff in the beginning and not have moved forward.
You mean you want to see the real estate before you get under contract on it and spend 2 months working on it?
It's amazing. It's
Crazy.
amazing, and it's happening nationwide. If anybody listens or knows us at all, I'm part of a group called Jake and Gino, and it has a couple hundred members and from all the states. And it's no different anywhere else, where people are, in a lot of cases, people are getting under contract without seeing anything. And brokers are able to now use COVID as an excuse, which, at this point, I necessarily don't buy. Also, when some sellers are so reluctant to, selling their own property, which I never had the problem. I just liquidated probably 30, 35 buildings pre-COVID, middle of COVID, post-COVID. And when I want to sell a building, I'll just send a letter to the tenant, thank them for their tenancy, everything they've done for us, and let them know that we've decided to sell the building. And it's not a big deal. We're going to be as considerate as possible through the process. And, when we have showings, we'll let you know. And they're always very grateful of that. They're more grateful of just being honest with what's going on. And you're able to show all the apartments, give the buyer, a proper look of what they're interested in, what they're interested in purchasing. And, that's the normal process. So over the last 2 years, that's how I did it. But unfortunately, the industry is not doing it quite like that. And I think it wastes a lot of time when people discover things after they get into a contract, and then next thing you know, the contract retrades or people back out when we could have seen this stuff in the beginning.
Yeah, I really prefer that approach of being transparent with every party. They say they're trying to not tell the tenants because they want to protect them, but then the building sells and they didn't even know it was for sale, so they don't have time to prepare, and it just doesn't add up for me. Um, do you think this will change going forward, or do you see that process staying the way it is?
Good question. I hope it doesn't stay that way. I'd like to think, at some point, I know both of us are very bullish, on the market based on not necessarily where we are in the market cycle, because the market's been so hot for so long, which is exciting. But at the same time, we do have this housing shortage. The type of apartments that we look for are certainly in need. They're easy to rent, and rents have been growing for some time. So it allows us to continue to be fairly aggressive as far as buyers. So at some point when things do kind of correct themselves, whether it be a year, 2, 4 years down the road, I think that situation will change naturally, meaning when the balance of buyers sellers market is much more of a balanced situation, the sellers that are able to, this is a golden rule in any real estate, is making it as easy as possible to show your property allows for a quicker and more efficient sales process. So when things even out a little bit, the sellers that are able to show their properties to the buyers the way that they're supposed to will stand out against the ones that are trying to stick to this, hey, I'll give you a sneak peek scenario and expect you to buy something that way. I'd like to think that they're going to have to change, back to, a more transparent approach when other sellers do that, when the market changes a bit.
Yep, I completely agree. Is there anything else you want to add for this process and this discussion?
Well, the 94 unit, I was doing so many different things along the way. You're not only getting under contract and doing due diligence at the same time, I'm arranging bank financing. You got to get going on that ASAP because the clock is ticking there. I had 90 days to get a bank commitment. So I had that all in line, term sheet, commitment, condition upon appraisal, which we didn't get that far. But at the same time, having to put together a general partner structure, whether we're going to joint venture this deal or whether we're going to syndicate this deal. So I'm left talking to investors along the way, warming people up on, if they wanted to be passive investors on the deal. So I was pretty much doing everything, keeping the ball rolling. And, so you've got 4 or 5 different things full forward ahead. And then everything stops on a dime based on the inspections. And now I'm circling back around and obviously letting the banks know that this deal isn't happening, letting investors know that this deal isn't happening. And, it was a big exercise, not a complete waste of time, because it was an exercise and you learn a lot based on any of these scenarios.
And then now that we are on the other side of it, it's looking for the next one. Nothing changes.
Nothing changes. We're back being patient.
Yep.
This is what we do. We know exactly what we're looking for. What I know is extremely important from my journey is, we have a certain criteria. We're staying in our lane. And we're waiting for that type of asset. And when it comes along, we certainly know what it looks like.
Yep, it'll be there and it's not falling apart.
That's it.
All right. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I think it was a good episode talking about something different.
All right. Thanks, Steven.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.